A seamstress ought to know better than to stand where gentlemen can see her. Lady Corisande Vane spoke loudly enough for the musicians, the footmen, and every guest beneath the chandeliers of Greyhaven House to hear. A ripple of laughter followed. Marianne Vale stood beside the long velvet curtain she had repaired, only an hour earlier, her sewing basket held against her skirts. She had not entered the ballroom as a guest. She had been summoned because Lady Corisande had torn the silver embroidery on one sleeve and refused to wait until morning. Yet now more than 100 people were looking at Marianne, as though she had deliberately stepped onto a stage. Across the room, 7 young noblewomen stood in a crescent beneath the candlelight. They had been arranged there with the care of jewels in a cabinet. Daughters of earls, nieces of marquises, one widowed viscountess whose mother had spent 3 winters arranging introductions. All 7 had been invited to Greyhaven for the same reason. The Duke of Ravenshade was expected to choose a wife. Lady Corisande extended her arm toward Marianne. "You have repaired the sleeve. Go back through the servants' passage." Another laugh moved through the room. Marianne lowered her eyes. She had learned long ago that silence cost less than pride when one was paid by the stitch. Then the ballroom doors opened. The Duke entered. Edmund Harcourt, Duke of Ravenshade, was 36 years old and possessed the sort of title that caused conversations to soften before he had even spoken. He crossed the polished floor, while mothers straightened their daughters' shoulders and fathers pretended not to watch. He approached the 7 noblewomen. He passed the first, then the second, then the third. One smile faltered. By the time he had walked past the 7th, the room had become so quiet that Marianne heard the small click of Lady Corisande's bracelet against her fan. The Duke did not stop until he stood before the seamstress. Marianne looked up. For the first time in her life she wished she were invisible. Edmund Harcourt bowed. "Miss Vale," he said, "before this room mistakes my intention any further, I should like to ask whether you would consider becoming my wife." No one laughed then. Not one person in Greyhaven House knew that the Duke's proposal had begun with a torn dress, 3 missing letters, and a secret that could ruin far more than 7 marriage plans. Before we return to where this story truly began, tell us where you are listening from today. If you enjoy stories of dignity, injustice, and unexpected justice, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And if you wish to help us continue bringing these stories to life, your support means more than you know. Now let us go back to the first winter Marianne Vale entered Greyhaven. 3 months earlier, Marianne had arrived at the village of Brackenford in cold rain. The railway had carried her only as far as the nearest market town. From there, she had spent nearly 2 hours in a hired cart whose wheels sank repeatedly into the mud. By the time Greyhaven appeared beyond the bare trees, her boots were wet through. She had imagined a great house would appear warm from a distance. Greyhaven did not. Its stone walls rose dark against the winter sky. Smoke moved from the chimneys. Tall windows shone with firelight, but the light seemed to belong to another world. Marianne stood outside the servants' entrance with one small trunk and the wooden sewing box that had belonged to her mother. She was 24. She owned 3 serviceable dresses, £4.11, a packet of needles, a pair of steel scissors, and a reputation for work so fine that wealthy women sometimes forgot the hands that had made it. Her mother had taught her sewing. Her father had taught her arithmetic. Both were dead. Neither had left her enough money to remain sentimental. A housekeeper named Mrs. Bell received her in the lower corridor. "You are thinner than the last one, Mrs." Bell observed. Marianne did not know whether this was praise. Mrs. Bell glanced at the sewing box. "Can you mend silk?" "Yes." "Velvet, yes." "Lace, if it has not been burned." Mrs. Bell looked at her for a moment. "Good. Lady Corisande burns things when she is angry." Marianne almost smiled. It was the first kindness Greyhaven offered her. Lady Corisande Vane was the widowed sister of the late Duchess of Ravenshade and had lived at Greyhaven for 8 years. Officially, she managed the Duke's household whenever he was in London. Unofficially, she managed everyone. Her daughter, Lady Honoria Vane, was 22, beautiful, accomplished, and widely expected to marry her cousin Edmund. Nothing improper was spoken aloud. Nothing needed to be. Marianne understood the arrangement within her first week. She saw it in the placement of Honoria at dinner. She heard it in the servants' hall when visiting families were discussed. She noticed it when invitations arrived, and Mrs. Bell muttered that Lady Corisande had rejected 3 of them before breakfast. Greyhaven was not merely a house. It was a machine of rank. Everyone knew where to stand. Marianne's place was upstairs when summoned, downstairs when finished, and nowhere at all when guests were present. She accepted this, not because she believed herself inferior, because £4.11 did not permit philosophical rebellion. Her workroom had once been a nursery closet. A narrow window overlooked the kitchen yard. A coal grate warmed only the side of the room nearest the fire. She worked there from morning until the household settled at night. Silk passed beneath her fingers, then velvet. Then pearl buttons, Paris ribbons, white gloves, silver braid, and lengths of satin worth more than Marianne earned in half a year. She handled wealth every day without possessing it. That amused her more than it embittered her. The trouble began with a blue evening gown. Lady Honoria had worn it during a dinner for 12. The following morning the gown arrived in Marianne's workroom with a split seam beneath the left sleeve. Marianne turned the garment inside out. The damage was ordinary. What she found inside it was not. A folded scrap of paper had been caught between the lining and the outer silk. She nearly threw it away. Then she saw handwriting. The paper contained only 4 lines. The first 2 concerned measurements. The third contained a name. Mr. Elias Thorne. The fourth contained a figure. £800. Marianne read it twice. She knew enough arithmetic to understand that £800 was not a dressmaker's account. Footsteps sounded outside. She folded the paper immediately. Lady Corisande entered without knocking. "Have you begun?" "Yes, my lady." Corisande's eyes moved over the table. For one instant Marianne thought she saw fear. Not anger, fear. Then it vanished. "The dress is required tomorrow. It will be ready." Corisande did not leave. She looked at Marianne's hands. "Your father was a clerk, was he not?" Marianne stiffened. "He kept accounts for a merchant. So you can read figures." "Yes." "How useful." The words were pleasant, the tone was not. Corisande finally turned toward the door. Marianne waited until her footsteps disappeared. Only then did she breathe. She looked again at the folded scrap. It would have been safer to burn it. She knew that. Instead, she placed it beneath the false bottom of her sewing box. It was the first time in her life she knowingly kept something belonging to a great household. That evening she regretted it, not because anyone accused her, because she heard a conversation. Marianne had been carrying Honoria's repaired gown toward the upper rooms when voices stopped her near the half-open door of the Duke's library. Lady Corisande was inside. A man answered her. Marianne recognized Mr. Pritchard, the estate steward. "The Duke must not see the Brackenford figures before London," Corisande said. "He rarely examines the village accounts himself. He has begun asking questions, then answer them." There was a pause. Marianne remained still. She should have walked away. Instead, the number 800 returned to her mind. Mr. Pritchard lowered his voice. "There are discrepancies." "Not discrepancies," Corisande replied. "Delays. The distinction will not matter if His Grace places the books before a solicitor." A silence followed. It was not ordinary silence. It seemed to harden the corridor. Then Corisande said something Marianne could barely hear. Honoria must be settled first. Marianne stepped backward. The floorboard beneath her shoe creaked. The library door opened. Mr. Pritchard appeared. He was a narrow man with grey whiskers and the permanently anxious face of someone who had spent his life serving people wealthier than himself. He saw Marianne. Then he saw the gown. His expression changed. Lady Corisande emerged behind him. "Were you listening?" "No, my lady." Marianne hated how quickly the answer came. Corisande looked at her for several seconds. "You were standing outside a private room." "I was taking Lady Honoria's gown upstairs." "Not the same thing." "No, my lady." Corisande moved closer. Marianne smelled lavender. "You have been here 6 days, Miss Vale. Greyhaven rewards discretion." Marianne kept her hands still. "And what does it do with indiscretion?" Mr. Pritchard looked at the floor. Corisande smiled. "It sends it back into the rain." The next morning Marianne was ordered to accompany the household carriage into Brackenford. Mrs. Bell gave her a list of ribbons, thread, lamp oil, and 2 jars of preserve for the kitchen. Marianne suspected the errand had been invented to remove her from the house. She did not complain. Brackenford was little more than one crooked street, a market square, an inn, a church, and a collection of shops, huddled together against the weather. For the first time since arriving at Greyhaven, Marianne felt she could breathe. No one watched whether she used the front door. At a haberdasher's shop, she met Mrs. Agnes Finch. Agnes was perhaps 60, though hard work had made age difficult to judge. She had once been a lady's maid at Greyhaven. Marianne knew this, because Mrs. Finch said so within 3 minutes of meeting her. "You are the new seamstress." Marianne looked surprised. "News travels quickly." "Not news," Agnes said. "Servants." Marianne laughed despite herself. It was the first time she had laughed since arriving. Agnes wrapped 2 spools of black thread. "You work for Lady Corisande, for the house." "Same answer if you ask Lady Corisande." Marianne hesitated. Then she asked the question she had told herself not to ask. "Do you know a man named Elias Thorne?" Agnes stopped wrapping the thread. The shop seemed suddenly smaller. "Where did you hear that name?" Marianne felt the danger at once. Nowhere important. There is no such place in Greyhaven. Agnes studied her face. Elias Thorne had been clerk to the old Duke. Marianne said nothing. Agnes continued. "Very precise man. Never misplaced a penny, never trusted Pritchard. What happened to him? Left. Why?" "That depends upon whom you ask." Agnes pushed the parcel across the counter. "Ask Lady Corisande and he was dishonest. Ask the kitchen staff and he saw something he was not meant to see." Marianne's fingers tightened around the parcel. "Where did he go?" Agnes shook her head. "No one knew." Then she leaned forward. "If you have found his name somewhere, Miss Vale, do not mention it again inside that house." "Why?" Agnes glanced toward the window. "Because the last woman who asked questions about Mr. Thorne was dismissed before sunrise." Marianne thought of the rain, of Corisande's warning, of the paper hidden inside her sewing box. She returned to Greyhaven before dusk. The carriage passed through the iron gates while winter darkness gathered over the fields. Inside the house glowed. Fire in the entrance hall, candles in the dining room, warmth behind every door that mattered. Marianne entered through the servants' passage and climbed toward her little workroom. Something was wrong. She knew it before she touched the handle. Her door stood open. The sewing box lay on the table. Its lid had been lifted. Marianne crossed the room. The needles had been disturbed. Her ribbons had been moved. The small purse beneath the tray was untouched. Whoever had searched the box had not wanted money. She removed the wooden tray. The false bottom remained closed. Marianne's heart struck once hard. She lifted it. The folded scrap was gone. For several seconds she could not move. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Lady Corisande stood in the doorway. Neither woman spoke. The room became utterly still. Corisande's gaze moved from Marianne to the open sewing box. "You should be more careful with your possessions." Marianne looked at her. For the first time since arriving at Greyhaven, fear did not make her lower her eyes. It made her think. The scrap had been taken. That meant the figures mattered. And if the figures mattered, Elias Thorne mattered. Corisande turned to leave. Then Marianne noticed something caught against the black lace at the woman's wrist. A corner of pale paper. On it, in the same cramped hand she had seen inside Honoria's gown, was a single visible word. London. Lady Corisande noticed Marianne looking. Her hand closed over the paper. For the first time her composure broke. Only for a heartbeat. But Marianne saw it. And in that heartbeat she understood something far more dangerous than the loss of the note. Lady Corisande was not afraid that Marianne had stolen a secret. She was afraid that Marianne might discover where the rest of it had been hidden. 1/4, approximately 2/438, 000120000 words. By morning, Marianne's workroom had been moved. No accusation was made. No reason was given. Mrs. Bell appeared after breakfast with 2 footmen and informed her that Lady Corisande required the nursery closet for household storage. Marianne was assigned instead to a small room beside the laundry stairs. It had no fireplace. Its single window did not close properly. Cold air entered through the frame, and moved continually across the floor. Marianne understood the message. It was not dismissal. It was something more useful to Coruscant. Punishment without scandal. If Marianne complained, she would appear ungrateful. If she became ill, she could be replaced. If she resigned, she would leave Greyhaven carrying questions. No one was obliged to answer. Mrs. Bell waited until the footman had gone. Then she placed a folded wool blanket on Marianne's chair. "I found this in the linen cupboard." Marianne looked at her. "Thank you." Mrs. Bell frowned at the window. "I did not say you could keep it." "No, I merely said I found it." For a moment, the older woman's mouth twitched. Then she left. Marianne wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and began sewing. Her fingers were stiff by noon. Her pride was stiffer. She told herself that Lady Coruscant had already made one mistake. She had shown fear. People who possessed complete control did not search sewing boxes in secret. They ordered them opened. That difference mattered. 3 days passed. Marianne behaved as though nothing had happened. She finished Lady Honoria's gowns. She altered 2 winter cloaks. She repaired a torn hem for an elderly countess visiting from London. She did not mention Elias Thorne. She did not ask about estate accounts. She did not look toward Lady Coruscant when the woman entered a room. It was not obedience. It was concealment. On the 4th evening, Mrs. Bell brought her a dark green dress belonging to Lady Honoria. The bodice requires taking in. Marianne examined it. Lady Honoria has lost weight. She has lost patience, Mrs. Bell said. With what? Everyone. That was all she would say. Marianne worked until the servant's supper bell rang. She had just begun gathering her thread when Lady Honoria herself appeared. Young ladies of her rank did not visit laundry passages. That alone made Marianne rise. "My lady." Honoria shut the door. She looked exhausted. Without the elaborate arrangements of hair and jewelry required downstairs, she appeared younger than 22. "Have you spoken to my mother about me?" "No." "About His Grace?" "No." Honoria stared at her. Marianne waited. The silence stretched. At last Honoria said, "She believes you have attracted his notice." Marianne nearly laughed, but Honoria's face stopped her. "I have spoken to the Duke twice. That is twice too many for my mother." Marianne set down her scissors. "Lady Honoria, I am employed here. His Grace could scarcely know whether I prefer tea or coffee." Honoria looked toward the door. "That has never prevented marriages in our family." The bitterness surprised Marianne. She had assumed Honoria wanted the Duke. Everyone assumed it. Apparently everyone was wrong. "Do you wish to marry him?" Honoria's head turned sharply. "No." The word came without hesitation. Then her expression changed. "Please forget I said that." Marianne said nothing. Honoria moved toward the cold window. "My mother has spent 8 years speaking of Greyhaven, as though it were already mine. She speaks of the West Apartments, the London house, the hunting land. She tells me which servants I shall keep when I am Duchess, and His Grace he has never proposed. Then perhaps he does not intend to." Honoria gave a small, humorless smile. "You do not know my mother." Marianne thought of the scrap of paper. £800, Elias Thorne, London. "Perhaps I know enough." Honoria looked at her. Marianne immediately regretted the words, but Honoria did not question them. Instead, she said, "If she believes you stand between me and Ravenshade, she will not merely send you away." Marianne's hands became still. "What will she do?" Honoria looked frightened now. "I do not know." That frightened Marianne more. 2 days later, the Duke summoned Marianne. The message came through a footman. "His Grace requests Miss Vale in the library at 11. Mrs. Bell stopped polishing a key. "The library?" "So I am told." Mrs. Bell lowered her voice. "Keep the door open." Marianne almost smiled. "Why?" "Because closed doors create stories, and stories travel faster upstairs than rats downstairs." At 11 precisely, Marianne entered the library. Edmund Harcourt stood beside a desk covered with estate papers. In daylight away from guests, he looked less like a duke and more like a tired man who had inherited too many responsibilities. "Miss Vale, Your Grace." He indicated a chair. Marianne remained standing until he sat. He noticed, "You have worked here nearly 3 weeks." "Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Bell tells me you are unusually competent with figures." Marianne felt a warning inside herself. My father taught me bookkeeping, so Lady Corisande informed me. That answer warned her further. The Duke opened a ledger. I have an embarrassing request. Marianne said nothing. He turned the book toward her. Several pages had been damaged by water, or appeared to have been damaged. Ink had run across columns of numbers. I am told the steward's clerk can reconstruct these totals, Edmund said. I would prefer someone who has no reason to please Mr. Pritchard. Marianne looked down. She saw rents, repairs, tenant payments, grain purchases, coal deliveries, cartage costs. The numbers were ordinary until she reached 3 repeated entries, £200, 300, 300. Together, 800. Marianne's pulse quickened. Do you understand the notation? Yes. Can you reconstruct the columns? Probably. The Duke watched her. Only probably. My father said certainty should be reserved for completed arithmetic. Something changed in Edmund's expression. Not amusement exactly. Respect, perhaps. It was the first time in her life Marianne had seen a man of his rank wait for her judgment rather than assume it. She sat. For nearly an hour she worked. Edmund did not hover over her. He read correspondence at another table. When she finished, she turned the ledger around. The totals do not agree. By how much? £800. The room became completely silent. Edmund stood. Are you certain the arithmetic is certain? The explanation is not. He came to the table. Show me. Marianne did. 3 entries had been carried twice. The original amounts appeared on earlier pages. The later entries had no corresponding invoices. Edmund's face hardened. Who keeps these books, mister? Pritchard supervises them. And before him, Marianne already knew the answer. She forced herself to ask, who was the previous clerk? Edmund looked at her. Elias Thorne. There it was, spoken openly. Marianne kept her face calm. Why did he leave? The Duke closed the ledger. I was told he stole from the estate. By whom? A pause. My aunt. Marianne looked down. She had reached the edge of what a seamstress could safely ask. Edmund seemed to understand. You have seen this name before. It was not a question. Marianne's breath slowed. If she lied now, she might protect herself. If she told everything, she might lose her position before nightfall. She chose the middle path. I found a scrap of paper in the lining of Lady Honoria's blue gown. Edmund's expression changed. What did it contain? Mr. Thorne's name and the figure £800. Where is the paper? It was taken from my sewing box. By whom I cannot prove that. Edmund stared at her. Marianne did not look away. Finally he said, Who knew you had it? No one. Then someone saw you find it, or searched because they feared I had found something. That possibility seemed to settle heavily between them. Edmund walked to the fireplace. He did not speak for some time. When he finally turned, his voice was quiet. Do not discuss this with anyone. Marianne almost smiled at the irony. That seems to be the most common instruction at Greyhaven. To her surprise, Edmund smiled first, only slightly. Then it disappeared. Miss Vale, I am leaving for London in 3 days. I intend to take these accounts to a solicitor who handled my father's affairs. Marianne felt a sudden certainty. Lady Corisande knows. Edmund's eyes narrowed. Why do you say that? Because I heard her tell Mr. Pritchard that you must not see the Brackenford figures before London. The Duke became very still. When? The night I repaired Lady Honoria's gown. Why did you not tell me sooner? Marianne looked at him. Because 3 weeks ago I was a stranger who entered your house through the servant's door. Your aunt had lived here 8 years. He had no answer. The silence that followed was different from the others. Not hostile, ashamed. Edmund closed the ledger. You were right. Not entirely. He looked at her. About what 3 weeks ago you would not have believed me. For the first time the Duke looked away. That evening Lady Corisande announced that Marianne would accompany the household to London. The decision stunned everyone. Most of all Marianne. She was to travel with Lady Honoria and 2 maids because several gowns required alteration before a series of winter dinners. Mrs. Bell heard the explanation and muttered, Convenient. Marianne agreed. Corisande had not discovered the Duke's conversation with her by accident. Someone had told her. The journey south began beneath a low grey sky. The household travelled first by carriage, then by railway. Marianne sat with the maids in a second-class compartment. Lady Honoria and Corisande travelled separately. The transition from Greyhaven to London felt like moving between worlds. The countryside became warehouses, then terraces, then streets shining under gas lamps. Carriages crowded crossings. Vendors called from beneath awnings. Smoke hung over rooftops. The Ravenshade house in London stood behind iron railings in Belgravia. Marianne was given a small room at the top of the servants' staircase. It was warmer than Greyhaven. That alone felt luxurious. For 2 days she worked without incident. Then Lady Honoria tore a glove deliberately. Marianne knew it was deliberate because the seam had been cut. Honoria placed it on her table. "I need another pair." "You have 6 pairs. I require a particular pair from Bond Street." Marianne looked at her. Honoria lowered her voice. "Mother is meeting Pritchard tonight." "Here, no. At the Crown and Lantern near Holborn." "How do you know?" "I read a note she left beside her breakfast tray." Marianne felt alarm. "Why are you telling me?" "Because yesterday she told me that when we return to Greyhaven, you will not be returning with us." Marianne's face remained calm. "Did she say why?" "She said your services were no longer required." "That was not dismissal." "Not yet. It was a deadline." Honoria pushed a small purse toward her. "Buy the gloves. Take your time." Marianne did not touch the purse. "My lady, if your mother discovers that you helped me, she already intends to arrange my entire life. I should like to interfere with one small part of hers." Marianne almost smiled, but Honoria's eyes were wet. This was not rebellion for amusement. It was desperation. That afternoon, Marianne left the Ravenshade house. She bought the gloves first. Then she walked east. The Crown and Lantern was not grand enough for Lady Corisande. That was probably why she had chosen it. Marianne entered through a side door and asked for tea. The innkeeper's wife placed her near the back wall. Marianne waited. An hour passed. Then Corisande arrived. Mr. Pritchard followed. They entered a private room. Marianne remained where she was. She had promised herself she would not listen at another door. Then she saw a serving girl carry a tray toward the private room. The girl returned moments later and left the door imperfectly closed. Marianne's promise lasted 10 seconds. She crossed the passage. This was the second time she knowingly stood outside a half-open door. It would also be the last. Pritchard spoke first. "The ledger is gone. The Duke took it." Corisande answered quietly. "Then Thorne must be found before Harcourt finds him." Marianne stopped breathing. Pritchard said, "We have searched for 8 years. Not thoroughly enough. He may be dead. Then find proof of death. And if he is alive—" A pause. Corisande's answer was almost a whisper. "He still has the original pages." Marianne's hand tightened against her skirt. "Original pages." Pritchard sounded frightened. "Those pages show everything. They show what you did." "What we did," Corisande corrected. Another silence. Then Pritchard said something that made Marianne feel cold despite the heat of the inn. "The money was not the worst of it." Corisande answered no. The trust was. Marianne did not understand. She heard movement. She stepped away immediately. A servant emerged from another room. Marianne returned to her table. Her hands trembled. Not from fear alone, from calculation. £800 had not been the secret. It had been the loose thread. The real matter concerned a trust, and Elias Thorne possessed the original pages. Marianne left the inn before Corisande. She did not return directly to Belgravia. Instead, she went to the address Agnes Finch had once mentioned when speaking of an old Greyhaven servant who had moved to London. Mrs. Martha Reed lived above a bakery in Clerkenwell. Marianne found her after dark. Martha was 70, nearly deaf in one ear, and suspicious of strangers. Then Marianne mentioned Greyhaven. The door opened wider. "You work there?" "Yes." "Poor creature." Marianne stepped inside. The room was small but warm. A kettle rested near the grate. On the table stood bread, hard cheese, apples, onions, and a jar of dark treacle. Nothing in the room was expensive. Everything in it belonged honestly to someone. Marianne found herself looking at the little table longer than she intended. Martha noticed. "Greyhaven feeds better." "Yes, but not always more kindly. The old woman laughed. You have learned quickly. Marianne sat. Do you remember Elias Thorne? Martha's amusement disappeared. Yes. Did he steal from the Duke? No. The answer came so sharply that Marianne straightened. Martha leaned closer. Mr. Thorne discovered Lady Corisande had been moving money from a family trust. Whose trust? Martha shook her head. I never knew. Did the old Duke know he was ill by then? Weak, confused some days. And Mr. Thorne, he made copies. Copies of what? Accounts. Letters. Instructions. Marianne thought of Corisande's words. Original pages. Where did he go? Martha looked toward the fire. He came here once. Years ago. He said he was leaving England, where he would not tell me. Did he leave anything? Martha hesitated. That hesitation answered before she did. Marianne waited. The room fell quiet. Finally, Martha rose. She crossed to a cupboard and removed an old wooden biscuit box. From beneath folded cloth, she took a narrow envelope. Mr. Thorne gave me this. Marianne did not reach for it. Why keep it 8 years? Because he told me to give it only to someone from Greyhaven, who asked the right question. What question? Martha looked directly at her. Who owns what Lady Corisande is trying to steal? Marianne's heartbeat slowed. Then she asked it. Who owns it? Martha handed her the envelope. Marianne opened it. Inside was not a confession, not a will, not a miraculous solution. It was a single copied account page and a note in Elias Thorne's hand. The account referred to annual payments from a trust established by the late Duchess's father. The beneficiary's name had been partially blotted. Only the first initial remained. H. Marianne looked at Martha. Honoria, I do not know. The note beneath the account contained one sentence. If the payments cease, look to the woman who profits when the girl becomes Duchess. Marianne read it twice. Then a third time. Lady Corisande had not merely been arranging Honoria's marriage. She needed it. For the first time in her life, Marianne understood how a woman could be both victim and instrument at once. Honoria was not being prepared for happiness. She was being positioned to conceal an old theft. Marianne folded the page carefully. She could not expose Corisande yet. A copied page was not enough. Martha's memory was not enough. Even the missing £800 was not enough. But they now had a direction, a trust, a beneficiary, and a vanished clerk who might still possess the originals. When Marianne returned to the Ravenshade house, a footman was waiting in the entrance hall. His Grace wishes to see you. Now, immediately. Marianne hid Thorne's copied page inside the lining of her coat before entering the library. Edmund stood beside the window. A second man was present. He was perhaps 45, plainly dressed, carrying a leather document case. Edmund introduced him. Mr. Nathaniel Brooke, my solicitor. Brooke bowed. Miss Vale. Marianne returned the greeting. Edmund held up a telegram-sized folded note, though it had arrived by messenger rather than wire. Something has happened. Marianne waited. Brooke opened his case. The old Greyhaven accounts held in London have been examined. Several pages are missing. Marianne felt the paper hidden against her coat. Brooke continued. But we found a reference to a private family trust. Edmund looked at Marianne. It was established for my cousin Honoria. Marianne's suspicions sharpened. Brooke went on. Payments from that trust appear to have stopped 8 years ago, exactly when Elias Thorne disappeared. No one spoke. The room seemed to contract around them. Then Edmund said, There is more. Brooke removed a second document. 3 days ago, someone attempted to close the remaining trust account and transfer its balance. To whom? Marianne asked. Brooke looked at Edmund before answering. To Lady Corisande Vane. Marianne felt no triumph, only dread. Because Corisande had already learned that Greyhaven's old papers were being examined, and a woman who had concealed a fraud for 8 years would not remain still, while a seamstress, a reluctant daughter, and a duke finally began pulling at the same thread. Marianne reached inside her coat. I believe she said that I have something you both need to see. But before she could remove the copied page, footsteps stopped outside the library. The handle began to turn, and Lady Corisande's voice sounded from the other side. 2/4, approximately 2, 528, 0001, 20000 words. Lady Corisande entered before Marianne could hide the paper again. Her gaze moved first to Edmund, then to Mr. Brooke, then to Marianne's hand inside her coat. No one spoke. For several seconds, the library held the peculiar silence of a room in which every person knew a lie had just become harder to maintain. Corisande recovered first. "I was told you had returned, Edmund." Her voice was calm. She looked toward the solicitor and brought company. Mr. Brooke bowed. Lady Corisande. Her eyes returned to Marianne. The seamstress appears to have become indispensable. Marianne removed her hand from her coat. Empty. Not yet. She had learned enough to understand that evidence should not be displayed merely because an enemy had entered the room. Edmund stepped away from the desk. "We are discussing estate business. Then Miss Vale should leave." Marianne waited. Edmund did not look at her. "Miss Vale is assisting me." Corisande's expression barely changed. "With accounts?" "Yes. A seamstress. A woman who can add," Edmund replied. The words were mild. Their effect was not. Corisande looked at Marianne. "You have been very fortunate in your employment." Marianne understood the warning. So did Mr. Brooke. He closed his document case. "Perhaps we should continue tomorrow." Corisande smiled. "An excellent suggestion." Marianne left first. She did not go to her room. Instead, she walked to the servants' staircase, descended one flight, crossed the back corridor, and entered the small linen room where Lady Honoria sometimes waited when she wished to avoid her mother. Honoria was already there. "You look as though someone has died." "Not yet." Honoria went pale. Marianne regretted the phrase. "Your mother entered the library." "Did she see Brooke?" "Yes." "Then she knows." "She knows enough." Marianne removed the copied account page from inside her coat. Honoria stared at it. "What is that something Mr. Thorne left with an old Greyhaven servant?" She handed it over. Honoria read slowly. Her face changed before she reached the end. "The trust. You knew of it. I knew my grandfather had left money for me. How much I do not know. My mother said it had been invested poorly." Marianne watched her, and you believed her. "She is my mother." The answer was not defensive. It was wounded. Marianne sat beside her. "That is why she could do it." Honoria read the copied page again. If these payments stopped 8 years ago, she did not finish. 8 years. The same period when Corisande had begun controlling Greyhaven. The same period when Elias Thorne had disappeared. The same period when Honoria, still a girl, had become entirely dependent on her mother. Not entirely, Marianne thought. Theft had taken money. Dependence had taken something larger. Choice. Honoria folded the paper. "What do we do?" Marianne took it back. "We do nothing that looks unusual." Honoria stared at her. "My mother may have stolen my inheritance." "Yes, and you want me to behave normally, especially now." That was the first lesson Marianne had learned from years of sewing. When a seam began to tear, pulling harder did not repair it. You found the hidden strain. You reinforced the cloth. Then you chose where to cut. For the next 3 days, Greyhaven's London household became a performance. Corisande performed confidence. Honoria performed obedience. Edmund performed indifference. Marianne performed invisibility. Only Mr. Brooke did not perform at all. He left every morning with his leather case and returned after dark. Marianne continued altering gowns. She measured cuffs. She replaced hooks. She repaired hems. No one watching her would have guessed that after midnight, she copied columns of figures by candlelight from notes Edmund had allowed her to see. Her father's lessons returned to her. Carry the figure. Check the date. Never trust a total merely because someone important has written it. For the first time in her life, the work of her mind earned the same respect as the work of her hands. Edmund began leaving small bundles of accounts beneath a folded newspaper in the morning. Marianne returned them before dinner. She discovered something important. The missing money did not move randomly. Each withdrawal occurred shortly before a large household expense, supposedly connected to Honoria. A governess, a season in Bath, special physicians, music instruction, jewels, travel, but many of those expenses appeared twice. Once in Honoria's trust, again in Greyhaven's household accounts. The duplication allowed someone to draw from the trust, while claiming Greyhaven had paid the same cost. Marianne created a separate book, not an official ledger, her own. Every line was neat, every sum checked twice. She bought the book herself from a stationer near Fleet Street with 3 shillings from her wages. It was the first account book she had ever owned. She wrote her name inside the cover, Marianne Vale. No title, no permission, no borrowed authority. It pleased her more than she expected. By the 5th day, she had identified more than £4,000 in questionable entries spread across 8 years. Mr. Brooke examined her calculations. "You should have been a clerk." My father said much the same. "Why were you not?" Marianne threaded a needle. "Because people prefer their clerks in trousers." Brooke looked at her over his spectacles. A regrettable waste of capable arithmetic. It was the closest thing to outrage Marianne had heard from him. She smiled. The investigation might have remained quiet for another week if Corisande had not acted first. A letter arrived from Greyhaven. Mrs. Bell had sent it privately through a footman she trusted. The message contained only a few lines. Mr. Pritchard had returned to the estate unexpectedly. 2 locked drawers in the old study had been emptied. One servant had seen papers burned after midnight, and Agnes Finch had disappeared from Brackenford. Marianne read the last sentence twice. "Disappeared?" Edmund asked. "The shop is closed. No one knows where she went." Honoria covered her mouth. Corisande sat near the drawing-room fire that evening, perfectly composed. If she knew anything about Agnes, she gave no sign. Marianne did not accuse her. That was precisely what Corisande expected. Instead, Marianne asked permission to return to Greyhaven. Corisande looked at her. "Why, Lady Honoria's winter wardrobe there contains 2 gowns needed for next week's dinner. You can have them sent. The beading may be damaged in transit." Corisande's eyes narrowed. "You are suddenly very devoted to your work." "It feeds me, my lady." The answer sounded sufficiently humble. Corisande granted permission. Marianne travelled north the following morning. Not alone. Mr. Brooke went separately. Edmund remained in London. That was deliberate. If all 3 vanished toward Greyhaven together, Corisande would understand immediately. Marianne returned through Brackenford under a sky heavy with snow. The village looked smaller than she remembered. The haberdasher's shop was closed. Its shutters were fastened. A handwritten notice had been pinned to the door, closed due to family illness. Marianne asked at the bakery. No one knew of any sick relative. She asked at the inn. The innkeeper knew nothing. Then a stable boy remembered seeing Agnes leave in a hired cart. With whom? A gentleman. What gentleman? Old, thin, grey coat. Where did they go? Toward Ashcombe. Marianne knew the name. A village beyond the northern ridge. 3 miles from Greyhaven. She hired a pony cart. Snow began before she reached the road. By the time she found the small cottage described by the stable boy, her gloves were wet and her feet had gone numb. A woman opened the door. "Not Agnes?" Marianne asked for Mrs. Finch. The woman hesitated. Then a voice came from inside. "Let her in." Agnes sat near the hearth, alive, angry, and beside her sat a man Marianne had never seen. He was perhaps 70, thin, grey-haired. His hands trembled slightly when he lifted his tea, but his eyes were sharp. Agnes pointed toward him. "You wanted Elias Thorne." Marianne stopped. The room seemed to lose all sound. The old man studied her. "You are the seamstress. How do you know that Mrs. Reed sent word?" Marianne looked at Agnes. "Why are you hiding here?" "Because someone came asking whether I had seen him," Agnes said. "Who?" "Pritchard." Thorne spoke. "He found me first." Marianne sat. For 8 years he explained he had lived under another name in the north. Not because he feared prison, because Corisande had accused him of stealing from Greyhaven and had threatened to ensure every employer in London heard it. He had tried once to contact the old Duke. The letter had been intercepted. Then the Duke died. Thorne believed there was no one left who would listen. "Why return now?" Marianne asked. "Because 3 letters arrived." "From whom?" Thorne looked at Agnes, then at Marianne. "Lady Honoria." Marianne felt a shock. Honoria had written before they left London. She had said nothing. Thorne continued. She found an old address among her mother's papers. She wrote to 3 places. One reached a former landlord who knew where I had gone. Marianne almost laughed. Corisanda had spent 8 years arranging Honoria like a piece of furniture. She had forgotten that furniture did not usually write letters. "Do you still have the original pages?" Thorne's expression changed. "Yes," Marianne exhaled. "We're safe." That answer frustrated her. "Mr. Thorne, Lady Corisand is attempting to close Honoria's trust." "I know. Then we need the originals." He looked toward the fire. "I kept them because I feared being called a thief. If I give them to you, she will know I am alive. She already does." The old man said nothing. Marianne understood his fear. 8 years of hiding could not be undone by one courageous afternoon. So she did not press. Instead, she took out her own account book. "I have reconstructed what I can." Thorne opened it. He turned the pages, slowly at first, then faster. His hands stopped trembling. "These entries?" "Yes." "You found the duplication?" "Yes." He looked up. "Who taught you accounts?" "My father." Thorne studied her for a long moment. Then he said something no nobleman had ever said to Marianne. "He taught you well." The praise struck deeper than she expected. Not because Thorne was important, because he understood what he was looking at. For the first time in her life, Marianne felt that the skill she had carried quietly for years might become a life rather than merely a memory of her father. Thorne closed the book. "The originals are not enough." "Why not?" "Because Corisand never signed the withdrawals herself. Pritchard did. Then Pritchard must speak." "He will not," Marianne thought, "unless he believes Corisande intends to sacrifice him." Thorne looked at her. "Now you are thinking like an accountant." "No." Marianne closed her book. Like a seamstress, a weak seam always breaks where the strain has been hidden longest. They returned to Greyhaven separately. Marianne entered through the servants' door just before nightfall. Mrs. Bell embraced her before remembering herself. "I was checking whether your coat was wet." "Naturally." Mrs. Bell stepped back. "Pritchard is frightened." "How frightened?" "He shouted at a scullery maid for dropping a spoon." "That frightened." Marianne understood. Men accustomed to authority shouted when authority began to leave them. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That night, Marianne carried a bundle of altered linen through the lower corridor. Pritchard appeared at the far end. She deliberately dropped a folded paper. He saw it. She picked it up quickly. Too quickly. His eyes followed. "What is that?" "Nothing, Miss Vale." His voice sharpened. Marianne hesitated just long enough. Then she said, "A copy of the trust accounts." Pritchard's face drained. "Where did you get it, London?" "From whom?" Marianne looked toward the staircase. "I should not say." He stepped closer. "Does Lady Corisand know?" Marianne lowered her voice. "Mr. Brooke believes she intends to claim you acted without her knowledge." That was not something Brooke had said, but it was something Corisand might do, and Pritchard knew it. His jaw tightened. She would not. Marianne said nothing, not because she had no answer, because silence allowed fear to write its own. Pritchard looked at her. "What has she told them?" "Nothing yet." Yet. The word worked. He turned away. Marianne watched him leave. The trap had begun closing. The next morning, Pritchard asked to speak privately with Corisand. Marianne knew because Mrs. Bell told her. The meeting took place in the locked study. No one listened at the door. No one needed to. 20 minutes later, Pritchard emerged white with anger. By noon, he had ordered a carriage. By 1, he was gone, where Marianne asked. "Mrs." Bell folded a cloth. "London." Marianne's pulse quickened. He was going to protect himself, exactly as she had hoped. She sent a note to Brooke. 3 days later, the answer came. Pritchard had visited the solicitor. He had not confessed, but he had asked a question. If an estate steward carried out written instructions later destroyed by the person who gave them, who bore responsibility? Mr. Brooke had replied that responsibility depended upon evidence. Pritchard had gone silent. Then he had asked whether copies counted. The seam was splitting, but Corisand was not idle. 2 mornings later, she returned to Greyhaven without Honoria. Edmund followed separately. Her arrival surprised the entire household. Her purpose became clear before dinner. A large gathering was to be held at Greyhaven in 6 days. 7 unmarried noblewomen and their families had been invited. Marianne heard the names. while adjusting table linen upstairs. The announcement moved through the servants' quarters like fire through dry paper. A bride was to be chosen. Lady Honoria returned the following day. She came directly to Marianne's workroom. "Mother says Edmund will announce his engagement. Has he told you that?" "No." "Then why believe her? Because she has invited half the county." Marianne looked at her. "That proves only that she wants half the county to believe it." Honoria sat. "I wrote to Mr. Thorne." "I know. You found him?" "Yes." Honoria closed her eyes. "Thank God." Marianne sat opposite her. "He has the original pages." Honoria looked up. "Then it is over." "No." The answer surprised her. Marianne continued. "Documents can be denied. A frightened clerk can be called dishonest. A copied account can be called mistaken. Your mother has spent 8 years preparing other people to believe her. Then what do we need? We need her to act now." Honoria understood slowly. "You want her to expose herself?" "Yes." "How?" Marianne told her. The plan was simple enough to sound dangerous. They would allow Corisande to believe the original trust papers would be brought to Greyhaven on the night of the gathering. They would also let her believe Pritchard had agreed to testify against her. Neither statement was entirely true. Thorne had not yet agreed to appear publicly. Pritchard had not confessed, but Corisande would not know that. If she remained calm, they would lose nothing. If she acted, she would choose the evidence herself. Honoria's face became pale. What if she destroys it? Then we make certain she reaches for something that is not the real evidence. Marianne prepared the bait. A packet of copied accounts. A false letter suggesting Thorne would arrive before midnight. A note claiming Pritchard had given Mr. Brooke copies of Corisande's instructions. The packet was placed in the locked library drawer. Corisande learned of it through exactly the person Marianne expected. A young footman loyal more to gossip than to anyone. By evening, Corisande knew. The following day, she behaved perfectly. Too perfectly. She discussed flowers, menus, guest rooms. She instructed Honoria to wear ivory. She ordered Marianne to repair a silver evening dress. Nothing happened. The second day passed. Then the third. Marianne began to wonder whether she had misjudged her. Perhaps Corisande would simply wait. Perhaps fear had made Marianne overconfident. That night she returned to her workroom and found her account book missing. Her own book. The one she had purchased with her wages. The one containing every reconstructed figure. For one terrible moment, Marianne could not breathe. She searched the table, the sewing basket, the cupboard. Nothing. She ran to the library. The false packet remained locked inside. Her book was gone. Not the bait, the real reconstruction. For the first time since beginning the investigation, Marianne felt she had lost control. She had kept no second copy. Every figure she had checked, every connection she had made. Months of theft reduced to orderly lines. Gone. Not because Corisande had outwitted a solicitor, because Marianne herself had become careless. She sat alone in the cold workroom. The house prepared for celebration around her. Footmen carried candles upstairs. Servants polished glass. Carriages were expected the next afternoon. Marianne stared at the empty place where her book had been. She did not cry. She wanted to. But grief would not restore arithmetic. So she began again. From memory. One column, then another. 200, 300, 300. The numbers returned slowly, not all of them. Enough. Near midnight, someone knocked. Pritchard entered. Marianne stood. He looked exhausted. In his hand was her account book. She stared at it. "Where did you get that?" Lady Corisande took it. Marianne's breath stopped. Pritchard placed the book on the table. "She ordered me to burn it." "Why did you not?" He laughed once. There was no humor in it. "Because yesterday she told me that if questions arose, the steward had acted alone." Marianne said nothing. The silence did its work. Pritchard sank into the chair. 8 years, he said. I told myself I was only following instructions. 3 figures at first, then another, then another. He rubbed his face. She said Honoria's money would be restored when the marriage was settled, that Greyhaven and Ravenshade would become one household, that no one would ever lose anything, except Honoria. Pritchard looked down. Yes, and Thorne. Yes, and you. His face tightened. Yes. Marianne opened the account book. Will you say that tomorrow? Before whom everyone? Pritchard looked frightened. I could lose everything. Marianne met his eyes. You already know what it is to live waiting for someone else to decide whether you keep it. He looked at her. That sentence reached him. Not quickly, but it reached him. At last he said, I kept copies of her instructions. Marianne became still. Where in the old study? Behind the back panel of the bottom drawer. Why? Because I never trusted her enough to leave myself entirely unprotected. For the first time that night, Marianne felt the balance shift. Not victory, possibility. Pritchard rose. There is something else. What she has instructed me to remove those copies before the guests arrive. Then do so. His face fell. Marianne closed her book. Bring them to the library. Let her see you obey. He understood. And if she follows me, then she will finally choose what matters to her most. The next evening, Greyhaven blazed with candlelight. Carriages rolled through the gates. Silks crossed the entrance hall. Pearls, velvet white gloves, jeweled combs, silver shoe buckles, and embroidered shawls passed beneath the chandeliers as servants announced names. 7 noblewomen arrived. Lady Corisande had arranged them exactly as she wished. Society had come to watch a duke choose. Marianne wore plain grey. She remained upstairs until Lady Corisande summoned her to repair the torn silver embroidery on one sleeve. The damage was small. Perhaps deliberate, perhaps not. Marianne worked quickly. When she finished, Corisande looked at her. You will remain out of sight tonight. Of course, my lady. You understand your position better than I once did. Corisande's eyes sharpened. Marianne lowered her head. The moment passed. Below music began. The trap was ready. Pritchard had placed the copied instructions in the library. Brooke had arrived quietly. Edmund knew only part of the plan. Honoria knew the rest. Elias Thorne had still not promised to appear. That uncertainty remained. Marianne descended the servants' staircase. At the foot of it, Mrs. Bell caught her arm. Someone has arrived at the north door. Who, Mrs.? Bell's face had gone pale. An old gentleman. Marianne's heart struck hard. Before she could answer, a footman appeared. Miss Vale, Lady Corisande has torn her sleeve again. She requires you in the ballroom. Marianne looked toward the north passage, then toward the light spilling from the great doors ahead. For one heartbeat, she stood between the hidden witness and the public room. Then she picked up her sewing basket. She entered the ballroom. Corisande stood beneath the chandeliers. The 7 noblewomen waited nearby. 100 guests turned their heads. Marianne crossed the floor. And Lady Corisande smiled as though she had already won. 3/4, approximately 2/658, 0001, 2000 words. A seamstress ought to know better than to stand where gentlemen can see her. Lady Corisande spoke loudly enough for the musicians, the footmen, and every guest beneath the chandeliers to hear. A ripple of laughter followed. Marianne stood beside the velvet curtain with her sewing basket against her skirts. For one strange instant, the past 3 months vanished. She was only Miss Vale again, the woman who entered through the servants' door, the woman whose fingers repaired gowns that cost more than she earned in a year, the woman expected to disappear as soon as the last stitch was tied. Lady Corisande extended her arm. You have repaired the sleeve. Go back through the servants' passage. The laughter returned. Not cruel from every mouth. That almost made it worse. Some guests laughed because Corisande had laughed. Some because a seamstress standing among titled women was absurd. Some because they had never once considered that the person being mocked might remember their faces. Marianne lowered her eyes. Across the ballroom, 7 noblewomen waited. Their mothers had placed them carefully within sight of the great doors. Lady Honoria stood apart. She wore ivory as Corisande had ordered. Her face had no colour. Marianne glanced once toward the north passage. Nothing. Elias Thorne had arrived, but he had not entered the ballroom. Perhaps he had changed his mind. She could not blame him. 8 years of humiliation did not disappear merely because truth finally had an audience. The musicians stopped. The ballroom doors opened. Edmund entered. Conversations faded. Lady Corisande smiled. For weeks, she had allowed rumours to grow. Tonight, the Duke of Ravenshade would choose. The 7 young women straightened. Edmund crossed the floor. He greeted the oldest countess. He acknowledged 2 gentlemen near the fireplace. Then he turned toward the 7 women. Lady Corisande's smile widened. Marianne knew what everyone expected. Perhaps Corisande expected Honoria. Perhaps she would have accepted another noblewoman if the match secured enough influence to protect her. What mattered was that the evening became a celebration before questions about money could become scandal. Edmund passed the first young woman, then the second, then the third. A mother lowered her fan. He passed the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, then the 7th. No one laughed now. He continued walking, straight toward Marianne. Her heartbeat became painfully slow. He stopped before her. The same room that had mocked her became silent. Edmund bowed. "Miss Vale, before this room mistakes my intention any further, I should like to ask whether you would consider becoming my wife." Marianne stared at him. This was the moment everyone would later remember. It was not the moment Marianne had planned. Lady Corisande made a sound somewhere between a breath and a laugh. "Surely this is a jest." Edmund did not turn. Marianne looked at him. She saw no amusement, no performance, only certainty. But there were more urgent matters than marriage. She had learned that much. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "I believe there is something this room must hear first." For the first time that evening, surprise crossed Edmund's face. Then someone spoke from near the north door. "She is right." Every head turned. Elias Thorne stood beneath the archway. His grey coat was damp with melted snow. He had not dressed for a ballroom. He had not attempted to look respectable enough for people who had once accepted his disgrace without hearing him. Agnes Finch stood behind him, Mrs. Bell beside her, and Mr. Brooke was there as well. The room became so still that the fire settling in the grate sounded loud. Corisande's face emptied. Elias Thorne walked forward. 8 years ago, he said, I was clerk to the late Duke of Ravenshade. A gentleman near the wall whispered something. Thorne heard it. Yes, the clerk accused of theft. He stopped in the centre of the floor. I did not steal from Greyhaven. Lady Corisande recovered herself. This is intolerable. Edmund turned at last. No, Aunt. It is overdue. Corisande looked around the room. She understood crowds better than anyone. The same people who could destroy a seamstress with laughter could destroy a lady with silence. She raised her chin. This man fled after money disappeared from the estate. Thorne nodded. Money did disappear. He reached inside his coat. Mr. Brooke stepped forward. Corisande's eyes fixed on the papers. Thorne held them out. These are original account pages from Honoria Vane's trust and copies of instructions given to Mr. Pritchard. A stir moved across the ballroom. Honoria did not move. Her eyes remained on her mother. Corisande laughed softly. Old papers. Copies. A disgraced clerk. Is this what Greyhaven has become? No, said another voice. Pritchard entered. This time the silence was absolute. Marianne watched Corisande. The woman did not look frightened when Thorne appeared. She looked frightened now. Pritchard approached Mr. Brooke. He carried a narrow packet. I kept these. His voice was not strong, but it carried. Instructions in Lady Corisande's hand. Dates, sums, directions for drawing from Lady Honoria's trust, and placing expenses twice in separate accounts. Corisande took one step toward him. You miserable coward. Pritchard flinched. Then, for perhaps the first time in 8 years, he did not lower his head. Yes, the answer startled everyone. Yes, I was a coward. He looked toward Honoria. I signed what I should not have signed. I remained silent when Mr. Thorne was accused. I told myself the money would be restored when you married His Grace. Honoria's face tightened. My marriage was to restore my own money. Pritchard could not answer. Corisande could. Your money was never lost. Honoria looked at her. Then where is it? Corisande's jaw hardened, invested. Mr. Brooke opened his document case. No, one word, nothing dramatic. Yet it struck harder than a shout. He removed several papers. Funds from Lady Honoria's trust were repeatedly drawn over 8 years. Some were placed toward household expenses already paid by Greyhaven. Some were used to settle private debts in Lady Corisande's name. 3 days ago, an attempt was made to transfer the remaining balance directly to her. The room murmured. Corisande looked toward Edmund. You intend to discuss private family finances before servants? Edmund looked around. The servants were already witnesses to the lies. Several titled guests lowered their eyes. Mrs. Bell did not. Neither did Agnes. Marianne thought of all the truths that travelled below stairs long before noble drawing rooms were willing to hear them. Corisande turned toward Honoria. Tell them. Honoria's lips parted. Tell them what? That I acted for you. Honoria stared at her mother. Corisande stepped closer. Everything I did was to secure your future. A duchess cannot live on sentiment. You stole from me to make me a duchess. I protected what could be protected. Honoria's voice broke. You took my money. I used money that would eventually have benefited you. You dismissed Mr. Thorne. He threatened this family. You tried to force me to marry Edmund. I tried to save you from becoming insignificant. That word changed something. Honoria stood very still. For years she had been spoken of as fortunate, beautiful, well-born, destined for Greyhaven. No one had called her what she truly was, controlled. Not until that moment. She removed one glove. Then the other. She placed them on a side table. I would rather be insignificant. Corisande stared at her. Honoria continued. I would rather live in 3 rooms and choose my own supper than possess Greyhaven because you stole the choice for me. No one breathed. For the first time in her life, Honoria did not ask her mother's permission before turning away. Corisande looked toward the crowd. There were people in that room who had accepted her invitations for years. Women who had praised her dinners, men who had accepted her hospitality, families who had discussed Honoria's marriage as though it were an estate transaction. Now, no one moved toward her. A countess near the fireplace quietly took her daughter's arm. A gentleman who had once sought Corisande's favor turned away. The punishment had already begun. Not prison, not violence, doors closing. Eyes withdrawing. Invitations that would no longer come. Marianne understood why this frightened Corisande more than anger. Society had been her instrument. Now it had become her judge. Corisande looked at Marianne. You. Marianne met her eyes. This began when you came into my house. No, my lady. Marianne's voice remained calm. It began 8 years before I arrived. The correction landed cleanly. Corisande's mouth tightened. You manipulated my daughter. No. I listened to her. You poisoned Edmund against his family. No. I showed him numbers. Several people lowered their faces to hide smiles. It was not a joke. That made it better. Corisande stepped closer. You think because he has made some foolish declaration tonight that you belong here? Marianne felt every eye in the room return to her. Months earlier, the question might have wounded her. Now she understood its mistake. Belonging was not something Corisande could grant or remove. I do not know where I belong yet, Marianne said, but I know it is not wherever someone tells me I must be grateful merely to remain. The ballroom fell silent again. Edmund watched her. There was pride in his expression. But Marianne did not turn toward him yet. This was not his moment. Mr. Brooke collected the papers. He explained only what was necessary. The remaining trust funds would be protected. The questioned transfers would be examined properly. Property and money taken improperly would have to be restored where the evidence supported it. Pritchard would give a full account of his participation. No one made promises of dramatic punishment. There was no need. Corisande had lost the thing she valued most before leaving the ballroom. Control. She looked at Honoria. Come with me. Honoria did not move. Corisande stared. Then something in her finally collapsed. Not loudly. Her shoulders lowered. Her face seemed suddenly older. I did what I believed necessary. Honoria answered quietly. That does not make it right. Corisande's eyes filled. She turned toward her daughter. I am sorry. The apology came too late and too small for 8 years. Honoria heard it. She did not forgive. She did not condemn. She simply said, I cannot go with you tonight. Corisande closed her eyes once. Then she walked from the ballroom alone. No one followed. Months later, Marianne would hear that Corisande had settled in a smaller house away from Greyhaven. Some of the money was restored. Some disputes required tedious correspondence and solicitors rather than dramatic scenes. Her name stopped appearing on the invitations that had once filled her mornings. Families who had sought her table found reasons to dine elsewhere. She was not destroyed. Life was rarely so tidy. She was simply forced to live without the machinery of influence she had used against others. Pritchard left Greyhaven after completing his account. He was not treated as innocent. He did not ask to be. Edmund allowed him enough time to arrange modest employment elsewhere, but no position of trust remained open to him at Greyhaven. Elias Thorne's name was cleared within the family, and among those who had once heard the accusation. That mattered to him more than money. He refused to return as clerk. At 70, he said he had done enough arithmetic for great houses. Agnes replied that he had done enough hiding as well. He did not argue. Lady Honoria did something no one expected. She went to London. Not to prepare for marriage, to learn how her own money was managed. Mr. Brooke arranged for her to understand the trust accounts, rather than merely receive reports about them. She discovered that arithmetic was less frightening than her mother had implied. She also discovered that she disliked Ivory. Marianne learned this in a letter. The letter made her laugh in the middle of breakfast. By spring, Marianne no longer occupied the cold room beside Greyhaven's laundry stairs. She had moved to London, too. Not as a duchess. Not yet. She rented 2 rooms above a respectable shop near a busy market street. One room became her home. The other became Vale & Co., dressmaking and alterations. The name Co. was ambitious. The company at first consisted of Marianne, one apprentice, and a 14-year-old girl, who came 3 afternoons a week to learn figures. Marianne paid them both, properly. Her account book sat beside her scissors. Each morning she wrote down every payment. Each evening she checked every sum. She took commissions from ladies who knew her work from Greyhaven, then from women who did not. She designed simpler dresses for widows who could not afford Paris silk. She repaired expensive gowns without pretending repairs were beneath her. She earned enough to choose her own coal. The first evening she bought a full scuttle without calculating whether she could afford supper. She stood before the fire and smiled. It was the first time in her life warmth belonged to her because she had paid for it herself. Edmund visited London frequently. He never entered the workroom without knocking. Marianne noticed this. She also noticed that he did not repeat his proposal. For 3 months. That mattered more. He had asked her before a ballroom full of people. She needed to know whether he wanted Marianne Vale or the courage he imagined he had seen in a dramatic hour. So they walked, sometimes in a garden, never in secret. They spoke of Greyhaven, of tenants, of books, of how badly Edmund understood fabric, of how badly Marianne understood horses. Once he asked why she had not answered him that night. She looked toward bare branches beginning to show green, because everyone was watching. I thought that was the point. For you, perhaps. He became quiet. Marianne continued. I had spent my life being told what my place was by rooms full of people. I could not decide the rest of it, because another room wanted an answer. Edmund nodded. I am sorry. She looked at him. It was not a grand apology. That was why she trusted it. 3 weeks later, in the garden of the London house, he asked again. No noblewomen, no chandeliers, no laughter, only damp earth, early roses, and the distant sound of carriage wheels beyond the wall. This time Marianne said yes. They did not marry immediately. That surprised society almost as much as the engagement. Marianne kept her business. Edmund did not ask her to close it. When someone suggested a future duchess ought not concern herself with dressmaking accounts, Marianne replied that a duchess who understood accounts might be useful. Edmund agreed. The story of the ballroom changed, as stories always did. Some claimed the Duke had fallen in love with Marianne the instant he saw her. That was prettier than the truth. The truth was slower. He first noticed her because she questioned a sum. He respected her because she did not flatter him. He trusted her because she brought him evidence, even when doing so endangered her employment. And he loved her only after learning that she would rather remain a seamstress with her own judgment than become a duchess without it. Months after the scandal, Marianne returned to Greyhaven. This time the carriage stopped at the front entrance. She sat inside for several seconds. Edmund did not hurry her. Then she stepped down. Mrs. Bell waited beneath the stone archway. Marianne smiled. Mrs. Bell curtsied. Too deeply. Do not do that. I am practicing. For what, Mrs.? Belle looked perfectly serious. The possibility that you become unbearable. Marianne laughed. It echoed beneath the entrance hall. Not cruel laughter. Not borrowed laughter. Warm laughter. She walked through the same house that had once frozen her beside the laundry stairs. The same corridors. The same library. The same ballroom. Nothing had changed, and everything had. Near the velvet curtain she noticed a loose thread in the silver trim. Without thinking, Marianne reached for it. Then she stopped. A young seamstress from her London workroom stood nearby carrying a sewing basket. Marianne handed the task to her. The girl repaired the thread carefully. When she finished, Marianne thanked her by name. That was the smallest thing Marianne changed at Greyhaven. It may also have been the one she valued most. That evening, she sat near the library fire with her own account book open upon her knees and a cup of tea cooling beside her. Outside rain touched the windows. Inside the room was warm. No one had permitted her to be there. No one needed to. A place gained through dignity was worth more than one granted through rank. If Marianne's journey reminded you that justice can begin with one person refusing to look away, please like this story, subscribe to the channel, and support us so more stories like hers can continue. 4/4, approximately 2/728, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 0, 0, 0, 0 words.